Welcome back from the dead. It is I, and I am week 7 of trying not to be sick anymore. I think I've only got congestion now and some fatigue, so I will attempt to tackle yet another piece of recon nonsense. Did you know that recons don't think empathy is biblical? According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, because empathy is a modern word. Sympathy came first. Empathy came anywhere between the 1850s and 1950s. It was like 19th and 20th century due to psychology, which, okay, that means that the word is already branded as evil per the recons. But okay, empathy, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, means the act of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. Sympathy, according to the same dictionary, means inclination to think or feel alike, emotional or intellectual accord, feelings of loyalty, tendency to favor or support, the act or capacity of entering into or sharing the feeling or interests of another, the feeling or mental state brought about by such sensitivity. Sympathy and empathy both involve feelings of concern for someone else. However, empathy goes a step beyond to include an active sharing in the suffering person's emotional experience, per the vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. Sympathy and empathy actually share a common root word, pathos, you've heard of it, meaning experience, misfortune, emotion, condition. Sympathy was used since the 16th century. It comes from a Greek word that combines pathos with the prefix sym, S-Y-M, which means with or together with. So together with experience, together with emotion, together with the condition. That honestly sounds literally like the word empathy. Just saying. Empathy was actually modeled on sympathy. It was coined, like I said, end of the 19th, early 20th. It was actually a translation strictly from a German word, and I don't know how to pronounce the word. You can look it up. It's Einfühlung. Einfühlung, which means feeling in or feeling into. Like I said before, psychology was a context it started popping up in, but also philosophy. And remember, pathos, as a word itself, it refers to the evocation of pity or compassion. So the origins of the word sympathy sound more like empathy. So why do we use a different word, empathy, to explain what sympathy was actually originally supposed to do? Sympathy meant what empathy literally means from the 16th century when it started to be used all the way up until empathy came on the scene. And I think it's very interesting that a new word had to happen, because I think that the ability to actually walk a mile in someone else's shoes was so convoluted, and it was not able to happen well any longer with, the passing of the times and how depravity just gets worse, I suppose, over time. A new word had to just come on the scene and be like, okay, this is actually the real thing. Like love doesn't really mean anything anymore. So we have new words, obsession and all kinds of wacky adjectives to clarify what we mean by love. The word became used and worn out. So they needed to revive the word with a new word. But it was a bit more than that when empathy came on the scene. Yes, it was replacing what sympathy was trying to accomplish originally and kind of got lackluster in, but it was actually referring to the act of imagining one's own ideas, feelings, or attitudes as fully inhabiting something a person's observing. For example, you're watching a dancer on the stage. Sympathizing with them would be, oh my goodness, the rigor that the dancer has to put herself through in order to accomplish her talent. Feet contort, the balance, and I can't even stand up straight going up and down the stairs, whatever. Empathy would be more like imagining you are the dancer and trying to feel what her feet feel or her balance entails or whatnot, so that you can better absorb the nuances of the sensations that the other person's going through. That's what we're trying to get at here. That's what empathy, the step further of empathy, was trying to accomplish, and it ended up just morphing into sympathy's historic definition anyway. That's a sin, apparently. Doesn't matter that, like, Jesus did it. Doesn't matter that Jesus came to be wounded for our transgressions and to take on how we felt under God's wrath and actually vicariously live through our flesh by taking on flesh, though he were sinless. No, forget all that. Empathy is a sin. Joe Rigney is a theologian who has no business being called a theologian. So remember C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters? Rigney tries and fails. He tries very hard to write his own version of the Screwtape Letters to attack empathy by, okay, if you haven't read the Screwtape Letters, basically it's pretend letters that I guess Satan is writing to like his nephew or something, or like his son, or like a disciple. It's been a while, okay? And he goes by Uncle Screwtape, but in the allegory, like, it's supposed to be the devil. And so he is advising what his protege is supposed to do. And I guess it's tongue in cheek, because Screwtape is like, oh, the best thing you could possibly do is make sure that you steer people away from prayer, and so then as you're reading it, you're like, okay, so obviously the right thing to do is pray because Satan's telling me not to, and therefore logic and switching it around. So Rigney tries to do a Screwtape letter thing by saying, oh, me, the devil, I guess, which no allegory there. You should do A, B, and C by promoting the idea of empathy, because that is the way that we get people to deny Christ. So then if you're reading it, you're thinking to yourself, okay, so then I actually should not be empathetic. And what does he call himself? Like Scraggle Tape or something? Like he has a different name, like Scragpot or something. Look it up. Basically, they take the vicariously living through, but they redefine what that's supposed to mean. They attack that version of it, and then anyone who tries to define it properly is part of the problem. It's on desiringgod.org, and it's an article on there, and it's called The Enticing Sin of Empathy. Let me just read some stuff. Compassion only suffers with another person. Empathy suffers in them. It's a total immersion into the pain, sorrow, and suffering of the afflicted. You're assuming that I'm supposed to think that's a problem already. Also, I don't really know what it means empathy suffers in them. Particularly, again, you're assuming that I'm supposed to know things and just like, oh, empathy suffering in somebody. Anyway, continuing. Under our influence, and remember, he's a Screwtape, so under like demonic influence, we've taught the humans to think only a heartless and unfeeling beast could oppose such a total immersion, such a generous act of love. Our recent success in this conceptual migration has given us ample opportunity for mayhem. Think of it this way. And when he refers to the enemy, it's backwards, so it's God. Think of it this way. The enemy's virtue of compassion attempts to suffer with the hurting while maintaining an allegiance to the enemy. In fact, it suffers with the hurting precisely because of this allegiance. In doing so, the Christians are to follow the example of their pathetic and repulsive master, just as the enemy joined the humans in their misery in that detestable act of incarnation. So also his followers are to join those who are hurting in their misery. So he's explaining compassion. But there's already a premise here that he's assuming we're all going to agree with, where he has to actually prove that premise. And he continues saying, however, just as the enemy became like them in every way but sin, so also his followers are not permitted to sin in their attempts to comfort the afflicted. I agree. Continuing. Thus, his compassion always reserves the right not to blaspheme. It seeks the sufferer's good and subordinates itself to the enemy's abominable standard of truth. What would that look like? Let's pretend we're going to sin while comforting. We're going to say, let's say somebody got into a car accident that was their fault or something and got hurt. I think if we were to sin in our comfort to them, we would say something like, oh yeah, like lie to them. You were in the right. Like, don't worry about the court case. Like, you ran the red light, but you had every intention of not hitting anyone. Like, just stupid stuff like that. Like, there's that. There's kid touches a hot stove. They were told not to. You know, you're soothing the pain, but you're like, it's not fair that you were told not to, maybe. Like, because, you know, it's not fair that you were not allowed to do what you wanted to do. I'm not exactly sure. Now, I know what they're thinking, though. I'm purposely not stating the obvious because what people usually are talking about when they say, oh, don't sin in this giving comfort is, oh, you're suffering persecution because you're gay, because people are so homophobic and don't want to accept your new gender kind of thing. That's obviously a problem. That's not comfort, though. That is called tolerance. It's called validation. You know, that's different than comfort. So this is what's about to happen. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit. This is what's about to happen. He is saying that you're not allowed to sin when you give comfort, and here is what empathy is. Which, again, with the screw tape set up, it's going to be a good thing in his opinion. So let's continue. Quote, our demonic alternative, empathy, shifts the focus from the sufferer's good to the sufferer's feelings, making them the measure of whether a person is truly loved. We teach the humans that unless they subordinate their feelings entirely to the misery, pain, sorrow, and even sin and unbelief of the afflicted, they are not loving them. That's not empathy. He has the line here, empathy shifts the focus from the sufferer's good to the sufferer's feelings. First of all, it doesn't. Second of all, you're assuming that the good for a person is different from their feeling. Why are they different? Why can't you actually seek someone's good by seeking the healing of their feelings? As if feelings are this demonic appendage. Like a screw tape. I mean, we're doing this whole thing. Scratch pot. That's what it is. Oh my gosh. He calls himself freaking Scratch Pot. Scratch Pot. I can't. Unbelievable. Scratch Pot. I'm supposed to take this man seriously. He's a grown adult. He's acting as if looking for someone's good is the antithesis to looking for their emotional healing. He says, shifting the focus from the sufferer's good to the sufferer's feelings. Sympathy, you know, historically or not, the definition-wise, never focused on the sufferer's good. So here's the thing. Compassion, let's rewind here. Compassion, he says, only suffers with another person. Empathy suffers in them. That's not a focus on the good at the expense of feelings. That's not a focusing on the good with feelings in the background. That actually sounds more to me, the way he defined it just now, sounds more to me like both are on an equal playing field. It's like, let's make this perfectly balanced marriage between seeking someone's good rooted in Christ by bearing their emotional pain. So he's already not even making sense in his own damn article. Let me read this again. He says again, empathy shifts the focus from the sufferer's good to the sufferer's feelings, making them the measure of whether a person is truly loved. Again, he's got homosexuality in mind, and that is all. He says it later, and in his book. He says the entire problem with empathy came to fruition when people started pushing the gay agenda. So now empathy is categorically wrong. So, quote, making them the measure of whether a person is truly loved. We, the demons, teach the humans that unless they subordinate their feelings entirely to the misery, pain, sorrow, and even sin and unbelief of the afflicted, they're not loving them. Again, that's not what happens. Let's continue. Let's see. He goes on to say that the devil's plan is to make sure that all emotions should be given attention. Okay, he says, teach sufferers to resent all resistance to their feelings. So, now I got a question. Does that mean that the devil teaches us to resist not acting on our feelings, or to resist not acknowledging our feelings? He says the devil teaches sufferers to resent all resistance to their feelings, which I guess the opposite teaches sufferers to embrace all affectation of their feelings, I guess. So I'm confused. Does that actually mean the devil teaches us to resist not acting upon our feelings? So like the devil wants us to act upon them? Or is that quote by Rugby saying that the devil is teaching us to resist not acknowledging our feelings, and so therefore it is a demonic thing to acknowledge that we feel a certain way? Because that's a very big difference. There's a big difference between I feel this way and I will not allow that feeling to dictate my moral choices, versus I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything negative, even though you do. There's a big difference between the two. Which one is Scratchpot telling us he prefers, like, or doesn't prefer? I don't even know. This is like double negative in the design. I'm going to just read this. He says, not only must comforters refuse to actually offer words of comfort, but we want sufferers to subtly but forcefully demand that their comforters not even feel hope or joy or faith themselves. Total immersion must be granted, or you don't love me. Anyone who refuses to jump through this hoop isn't being empathetic. That is not empathy. You're literally defining what enabling or manipulation is. So like, you're saying that empathy by definition, by design, is worshiping someone's whim. You can have empathy for someone without enabling. He says, empathy is like helping someone out of quicksand by jumping in with them. No, it's not. I am upset that you feel worthless because someone made fun of you being gay. I don't actually believe you should be gay. I think that is a sin. However, I also feel terrible for people who feel like they are worthless or made to feel like they actually aren't made in the image of God. And therefore, I'm going to become gay. That's what jumping in the... I mean, am I wrong? Or maybe this is less extreme. It's more like, I'm not going to become gay, but I feel bad that your identity as a human being made in the image of God was assaulted. Therefore, I'm going to tell you that it's okay to be gay. It doesn't follow. And honestly, that person who is upset that they were mocked or ridiculed or whatever isn't going to turn to the person saying, hey, I'm really sorry that happened to you, and say, you need to tell me that it's okay to be gay. Now, there are plenty of times where people are going to say, hey, you need to you need to validate what I'm doing, but not in the context of when that gay hurting person is actually receiving kindness. Like, they're not going to be like, well, that's not good enough in that moment when empathy is given, because empathy has nothing to do with enabling. Empathy has nothing, because it's a different category. I don't know if I'm making this clear. When the gay community is looking for validation and the ability to like be coddled for what they're doing, that's what they're going to look for. They will confront people on that playing field. You need to tell me that what I'm doing is okay, as a belief structure, as an ideology, as a life practice. Empathy has to do with suffering and hardship. It's not going to come back and bite you that way, because the person that is looking for kindness, compassion, they lose their home in a flood. They're gay. They're living together, married, quote unquote, gay, lost their house. I can give them food and shelter. They're made in the image of God. They're not going to turn around and be like, well, you have to be okay with me being gay, like in your mind, before I will accept like your compassion. It's not the same boat. Anyway, I feel like I'm beating that horse. He starts to pitch empathy against compassion. So he's saying compassion is a sympathetic consciousness of another's distress together with a desire to alleviate it. But here's the thing. Not every pain can be alleviated. A desire to alleviate the person's distress is actually, it's not a bad thing, but if that's your quest, like even a side quest, you're actually missing the point of relationship. I'm not necessarily opposed to that being a working definition of compassion, but you're acting like God if you think that every pain can be alleviated, or that you can't have compassion unless you desire to alleviate that person's distress. I'm not saying you don't have a desire to alleviate the distress, but the desire to alleviate distress usually is followed by action. Sometimes you can't actually do anything except assure someone that you are there, and then you turn them toward the compassionate one for the comfort. Look, someone has a miscarriage. You know what your precious sympathy does? Well, at least they're in a better place. Well, at least you can have children. You can try again. Well, at least this, at least that. The mom doesn't give a fuck what you have to say at least about. She's grieving the loss of her children and will not be comforted, says the Bible. Be there with your arm around them, with a meal, with a prayer. Sit on the floor as they're in a lump, crying, and cry alongside them. You can't alleviate that pain. You can't do it. So shut up. But then here's the other thing. In the context of what we know Mr. Rugby here is talking about, you can't cure the gay. You can't have merely, at least, or even probably at all, this kind of working definition compassion for someone who's a homosexual. You can be sorry that they're going through A, B, and C as a gay person, persecution, whatever, with a desire to alleviate it if it's according to what you just told me your working definition was and what you said earlier as far as being rooted in the Bible. What are you going to do every time you see them? Try to pray the gay away. You can't do it. You're no savior. How proud are you? Here, let's see. Oh, brother. He says, when you can move, again, the little Satan thing. When you can move your man from the bland but true belief that feelings are important to the false but potent impression that feelings are all that's important, then you know that you have him. That's the dichotomy they make. What is he saying now? Compassion, when untethered from patience and wisdom, becomes tyrannical and attempts to force the sufferer out of their sorrow against their will. I can't even read it. In other words, he's saying, forcing someone to change against their will is compassion. That's what he just said. I'm going to read it again. Do the little opposite thing because it's a scratch pot letter. Compassion, when untethered from patience and wisdom, becomes tyrannical and attempts to force the sufferer out of their sorrow against their will. This, at the heart of this, it's the inability to realize that God created emotions and wishes us to unite upon him through them. And I'm not saying through them as in the Bible is just like an random aid and it's really how we feel that matters. No, imagine a world with no emotions. How would we unite? We can read the scripture, but there's a mental assent. We have to be like, oh, I agree. This feels positive. I mean, you can't do that. It feels positive. Like, how do you do that? How do you unite to Christ without emotion? It's just a vehicle. It's not a foundation. It's just a vehicle. It's just a human vehicle. It's like, how does blood get from point A to point B without a vein? Like, the vein isn't the blood, okay? But you need it. Anyway, that was the original little scratch pot rub whatever his freaking face is. But it gets better.